Nowadays, the European Union is an active player in space. As we will see, the Union has a dedicated space policy, space program and funding. Several specialized institutions and bodies implement the space program in accordance with legal rules described in detailed instruments. However, this dedicated space framework was not always present. In today's video, we will see the origins of EU space governance and the steps it took the Union to get where we are today. This history is important to understand why current EU space governance functions the way it does, and what can be done to improve this system in the future. The history of EU space governance is typically divided into three periods. First, the origins at the start of Europe's activities in space. Second, the changes introduced by the Lisbon Treaty. And third, the evolutions that have taken place since then. Each of these three periods is marked by its own challenges and political disagreements. Some of the landmark events that defined these periods may already be familiar to you, while others are specific to the space industry. What were they? The origins of space governance in Europe can be traced back to the middle of the last 20th century, when the national space programs of France, the United Kingdom, and Italy were developed. Cooperation between European states in space followed rather quickly, when the European Preparatory Commission for Space Research was established in 1961. This preparatory commission kicked off European space governance with a recommendation to establish two specialized European space organizations. First, the European Space Research Organization, or ESRO, and second, the European Launcher Development Organization, or ELDO. Both organizations were founded in 1962. As the names suggested, the mandates of ESRO and ELDO were rather limited in scope. They focused on building scientific cooperation in order to establish a satellite launch vehicle for Europe, called Europa. The organizations had a bare-bones institutional structure and very little policy and legal powers. To make matters worse, the Europa program faced a number of technical problems, and all launches of the three-stage rocket failed. Clearly, European space governance needed to be rethought. In 1966, countries came together at the European Space Conference in order to discuss the merger of ELDO and ESRO and to develop a European space policy. A couple of years later, in 1975, the Convention for the Establishment of a European Space Agency, ESA, was signed. In 1977, a second European Space Organization was created, the European Meteorological Satellite Organization, or EUMETSAT. The first successful building blocks of European space governance were finally there. However, one key actor was still missing, the EU. Where was it? When ESA and EUMETSAT were established, the EU was still known as the European Economic Community, or EEC. It had no specific space competence or institutions or bodies dedicated to space. The strategic importance of space meant that states preferred to organize their own cooperation outside of the European Community institutional framework, with a limited focus on scientific and technical partnerships. However, it was of course clear to the European community that space can work as an important tool to bring economic benefits to its citizens. So, in 1979, the European Parliament adopted a resolution for the space sector. It was followed by the first resolution on European space policy in 1981. That resolution was important because it tasked the member states with increasing their efforts in space. It also signaled the start of a rocky relationship with the European Space Agency, which at that time was the main policy-forming actor in Europe for outer space. Nevertheless, the European Commission gave good reasons for the European community to become involved itself in outer space. Space was having an increasing impact on many aspects of the economic, industrial and cultural life of European society. And the European community had certain exclusive or shared competences in a lot of these areas. For this reason, the European Commission adopted a communication in 1988 under the presidency of Jacques Delors, entitled "The Community and Space, a Coherent Approach." And in that landmark communication, the Commission justified action in space based on its links with other policy areas of the European community. As a result, there were now two Europes in space, ESA and the European Community. The European Union as we know it today was established by the 1992 Maastricht Treaty. However, even then the founding treaties of the EU still did not contain a space competence. This did not stop the Union from working on its first flagship space programs around the turn of the century under the names EGNOS, Galileo and Copernicus. The Union did so on the basis of other related competences, such as trans-European networks and industrial policy. The Union also created certain bodies for the management of these programs, most importantly the European Global Navigation Satellite Systems Agency, or GSA. Without a dedicated space competence, however, these first steps rested on a rather shaky legal foundation. The Lisbon Treaty, signed in 2007, entered into force on the 1st of December 2009, changed all of this by giving the EU its first explicit competence in space. This was clearly an important improvement, as the Lisbon Treaty laid the foundations for new developments in EU space governance. However, it also raised discussions over how this space power should be exercised and how it should be shared with EU member states. We will discuss these issues in detail in the following modules. The discussion of these issues constitutes a lot of what composes the third step in the evolution of EU space governance. Without giving anything away, we can already single some of the most important developments that took place since the Lisbon Treaty. First, in 2021, the Parliament and Council adopted a comprehensive space regulation. This space regulation brings together all of the main institutional and project components of the EU space programme. It also establishes a dedicated EU agency for the space programme. Second, in 2022, the Commission and the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy adopted a joint communication on space traffic management, followed by, thirdly, a joint space strategy for security and defense a year later. In 2024, fourthly, the Commission is expected to put forward a proposal for the first ever EU space law. The law will aim to harmonize and increase the level of sustainable, secure and safe spacefaring across Europe. Finally, the increasing profile of the EU in space also meant that its relationship with the European Space Agency needed to be revised. Over the years, various cooperation agreements were negotiated between the two, ending with the Financial Framework Partnership Agreement in 2021. All of these issues will be discussed in future videos. In the meantime, please take the time to familiarize yourself with these basics of EU space governance, and we will see you in the next video for an overview of the institutional framework of EU space governance.